We all know what corporate brands are, but do you have clarity on your own personal brand? Today, we examine the 5 elements of an effective personal brand with Coach Heather Backstrom. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 133.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. This is a weekly coaching show to help us all be better leaders through improved communication, human relations, and personal productivity, the people side of organizations and business and productivity. And I'm so glad that you are back again for another week of the show. And today we are tackling a topic that for all of us is an important one, but for many of us, and me included, have not done as much thinking or looking at as probably we should. And part of the reason for me is that the topic of personal brand is one that tends to be a little more fuzzy for some of us, or even fluffy a little bit. And when we think about personal brand, we wonder, what does that mean? And why would it be of value to me to think about my personal brand and think about the elements of it and to begin to look at it strategically? And I'm so glad today to welcome actually a past guest to the show, and that is Heather Backstrom. Heather and I are old friends, and she was on the show back on episode number 77 when we talked about living and working with purpose. Heather is an executive coach, and she has worked with leaders in the healthcare, aerospace, and nonprofit industry. She has done a tremendous amount of work and research around personal branding and spent a lot of time working with clients around this practically. And so I'm really glad to have her on the show today to talk about the 5 elements of an effective personal brand and why we should care about that. Heather, welcome to Coaching for Leaders.
Wow, Dave. Thank you for such a beautiful, warm introduction. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm so thrilled to be back with you and your audience again.
Well, I am thrilled you're back too. It's always great to have a guest return, and you and I are old friends, and I'm always thrilled to talk with you, and you just have a great attitude, which I love. I'm all about working with people and getting to talk to people that are just doing great things in the world, and I'm really excited that you are here to give us some perspective on personal branding. Okay, so we should probably start and have some dialogue first about what is a personal brand, and why should leaders care about personal branding? Right.
Yeah, so personal brand, I'll give you my perspective, and your listeners may find other people out there who do personal brand work who have a different perspective, and that's perfectly fine. That's, I think, what makes the world interesting, that people have different opinions and takes on topics. So my philosophy, my approach around personal brand has to do with one's authenticity and who they really are from the inside out, and bringing the best of a person out into the forefront. To give a distinction of other approaches or other perspectives on personal brand, sometimes it can be associated with more of the veneer or more of the external to a person, things like how they dress or the people that they hang out with or the associations, the professional associations they belong to, or how the person looks or the kind of car that they drive, the neighborhood they live in, the school that they attended. So some perspectives on personal brand are more about what I call personal image rather than my perspective on personal brand, which gets to the heart of an individual by bringing out the best inside of them out and conveying to others and being stronger in their own authenticity and values and purpose and so forth.
Well, you and I are both big believers in leaders focusing inwardly first and examining themselves
Yeah.
And by doing that, like, we can really create some wonderful things externally. And I'm glad you made that distinction, because that personal image part is really important, how
Absolutely.
we show up in the workplace and all that. But it's probably, I would say, even more important for us to really look internally first and to figure out, who are we and what drives us.
Right, exactly. What drives us and what gives us meaning and value, and what are the distinctive qualities about ourselves that we can use to make a difference for other people.
Well, let's look at these 5 elements in detail here then. Some of these we've covered on the show before, and some of them we really haven't, Heather, so that's why I'm glad that you've brought these 5 to us today. But let's start with one that we have talked about before, but really bears looking at again, because the term values is one that, for me at least, Heather, when someone first mentioned to me, if you figured out your values, or I went through an early workshop in my career on kind of figuring out values and all that, I frankly thought it was kind of fluffy. I just didn't see. I was like, all right, so I'm going to sit here and like talk about like, okay, integrity, honesty, what all the things that I thought were important. But it just seemed to me that I didn't see the connection of why defining that was how that related to like my work. And so could you like just help us out with why is that important, to get some clarity on it, and how does it actually help us out practically?
Right. So let me offer up maybe an example about myself that might help illustrate it. So a couple of values that are really important to me are independence and creativity. So I love being an independent person and being able to make my own decisions. I like being creative in terms of taking an innovative approach when I'm working with somebody, or when I'm designing a workshop, or even designing, say, a PowerPoint. I like to, instead of maybe using bullets, I'll use little stars or something to that effect, just to make it a little on the creative side. So for me, because those values of independence and creativity are high for me, then working inside in a corporation can feel constraining to me, because I kind of feel like I have to be in the box of the corporation. And I can operate fine. I can get the work done, and I can produce good quality work, and I can have good relationships with the people with whom I work. But internally, I can feel this sense of, dissatisfaction, and I can feel this sense of constraint, rather than the freedom that I feel that I get when I'm able to really be and exercise independence and exercise creativity.
So
I think,
go ahead. Oh yeah. Sorry to cut you off. If I'm hearing you right, then, so part of the getting clarity around that and recognizing that for yourself has driven some of the decisions about where you work and what kind of work you do and who you engage with. And I know you've done a bunch of that, actually, of going out and doing some university teaching and working on projects and doing coaching and doing things that are outside of the traditional corporate norm.
Exactly. And that's, I love that you brought up the teaching, because that's a prime example of one of the things that I love about being in the classroom is designing the content of the class and thinking about, how can the students best learn, and what kind of exercises can I infuse, and how can I get them to work together, and are there videos I can show, and just having that full freedom to design content and to teach in the classroom based upon my own sense of creativity and independence.
I think this is something that for a lot of us, we haven't thought as much about that we probably could, of what we really do value and what's important to us. And for those who haven't done much thinking about this, or maybe they've thought about it, but they haven't really done much with it, what would be a first step that you'd suggest that would help all of us get a little more clarity around what are the things that we value?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that immediately come to my mind. Of course, the internet is just full of resources. So just getting on the internet and doing a search on values clarification exercise, will reap a number of results that might be helpful to your audience members. So that would be one step. Another step, or in addition, in concert with that step, I should say, would be to think about those experiences in your life that really made you feel great, really brought you joy. And what were the qualities, what were the characteristics of those experiences that made you just feel, on top of the world? And just to go back to the teaching, just to reflect on that for a moment, when I first started teaching, I would come home at the end of the night, because class was at night from 6 to 10. I would come home at the end of the night and have a hard time falling asleep because I was so energized by having been with the students and learning from them and teaching and being engaged with them. So that is a sign that I was doing something consistent with my internal values.
I love it. I can totally relate to that too. I've had that experience doing teaching and training and coaching. And one of the things you just mentioned, Heather, reminds me of an exercise I've often done with clients over the years is have people picture and even articulate what's an ideal day. What's the ideal work day? If they had to even map out what it was going to look like to, wake up in the morning, what they do first thing in the day, how their work would show up, how their family would show up, all of that oftentimes when people do that, I found that their values come out pretty clearly in that exercise.
Absolutely. Yes, they sure do. That's a great exercise and one that a person can do on their own.
Perfect. So one other resource, before we go on to the third one here, for those who are looking for a values tool, there's one that I had put together, a couple of years ago, but it's still very relevant from one of the early episodes of this show, back on episode 22. There's a values exercise. If you go to coachingforleaders.com/values, you can download a whole list of values that'll just get you thinking about that. But I really like that ideal day exercise. I think that might even be a better place to start. Okay, so let's take a look at the second element of personal branding here, which is vision. So first of all, what is a vision, and how is it different than looking at what your values are?
Sure, right. And certainly values plays into your vision and vision plays into your values. There's certainly a connection there, so they're not distinct from each other. But a vision is about where you are now and where you're headed, where you wish to be, the destination that you're wanting to reach. So it's that forward future picture of you and your life, and it's compelling, meaning that there's this emotional draw to it, that your heart just reaches out for that vision. And vision is also powerful when you have a strategy to move forward and to reach that vision.
I love it. And could you give an example maybe of how either vision has been powerful and compelling for something you've done personally, Heather, or maybe one of the folks you've worked with, just so we can get a feel for how that would drive our behavior and our actions?
Sure. Of course. Yeah, sure. Actually, every client I work with, we spend some time up front, quite a bit of time up front actually, working on their vision and understanding the person they are today and the person that they're becoming. And for me personally, one thing that I did, to give a story from a couple of years ago or so, I was, as you know, we were in graduate school together, right?
We were. Old college buddies.
We were. And I was at the point, we were both at the point, obviously, in the program of the dissertation, of working on the doctorate. And although I consider myself a pretty self-initiating kind of person, when it came to working on the dissertation part of the graduate degree, I really kind of lost some steam and wasn't doing much work on it. And it was this heavy weight that was kind of like on my shoulders. And the end of that calendar year was coming up, and I thought, gosh, for next calendar year, what is it that's really going to make me feel a sense of happiness and fulfillment? And the answer to that was finishing the dissertation. So what I did before January 1st of that year rolled around is I got out paper and crayons and pens and all that fun craft stuff, and I drew a picture of what my life would look like and how I would feel at the end of the year once my dissertation was complete. So I made this very colorful picture. So I put the picture up in my garage so that every morning as I left my house, I would see the picture, and then every evening as I came home, I would also see the picture. So I put it in a place that was very prominent for me so that I would always be reminded every day of this vision that I had created for myself. And I have to very happily say that by the end of the year, that vision was a reality, and it felt absolutely astounding and terrific.
And I remember you going through that time. I remember your turnaround as far as how quickly you finished was pretty substantial. And I remember I was way, way behind where you were when that was going on. And I noticed how deliberate and how much action you put in on a weekly basis to getting toward that goal. I think that's really interesting because I didn't do that, Heather, at that time. And I think it's really interesting how when we can define exactly where we want to go, we have the target and what it looks like, and we have a way to remind ourselves of that visually or on a regular basis, that really is compelling.
It is very compelling. It's very much, and especially when we really get into the feeling of it, of what it's going to feel to embody that vision, to have that vision in reality. That makes it even all the more stronger.
I like it. And there's so many ways to do this. I mean, the way you did, I've seen many people use, and I've done exercises where creating a picture, creating what something looks like, and being able to see that visually is really helpful. I know for some people, they like to write out exactly what that vision looks like, write out what their life looks like a year from now, what their work looks like a year from now. And you and I both worked with people where we've done exercises where we even look at that vision from a long-term perspective of having people look at, what do you want your 85th birthday party to look like? What would you want to have accomplished? And that's a really powerful exercise too. I've found that to really drive a lot of my thinking on how I'm spending my time and my resources now at this point in my life.
So whether it's a vision for the upcoming year or it's a vision for the upcoming decade or until your 85th birthday, all of it, any one of those strategies can be very, very powerful. And then as you just pointed out, some people enjoy writing, some people enjoy making a picture. And with all the technology out here now, someone could easily videotape themselves or, have some kind of electronic diary that they could use as a vision point.
Yeah, I think the key is just like having that target. Do you know where you're going? I remember watching years ago or listening, I can't remember which, Heather, years ago to a Zig Ziglar talk. And Zig Ziglar had this line where he would be like, you can't hit a target you don't have. And if, how would you shoot for a target that you can't see and it's not even there? So if you're trying to get somewhere in your career, your personal life, setting that vision first, don't worry about the how to get there yet, but set the end goal and then figure out the structure of how you're going to do that. Right,
exactly.
It's funny how many people don't do that, isn't it?
I know, it is. And I think sometimes people fantasize about the vision of their life.
Yeah.
Which is great. I think, though, to really harness the power of vision, it takes exactly what you just pointed out, Dave. It takes that practical putting it down on paper, putting it in a picture, putting it in an audio file, writing about it in a diary. It takes really having that target created and available to you so that you keep moving forward toward it.
You and I are both in agreement that vision is really different than the third element here you've identified, which is purpose. And sometimes people use these two elements interchangeably. So what's the difference between purpose and vision?
Yeah, so and again, all of these have links toward them, but there's also distinctions amongst these items that we're talking about. So vision is where you're headed. For me, purpose is how you get there. It's the how you interact, how you talk, how you behave, the choices that you make, the relationships that you build, the people that you surround yourself with. So for me, purpose is more about how you work toward that vision.
Got it. So if to way oversimplify it, but maybe helpful, is vision is the future, purpose is the present. It's basically what you're doing right now to get to that larger vision.
Yeah. So am I working in a way that's purposeful? For instance, if being cooperative, showing cooperation is a value of mine, and I have this future vision of myself. I've outlaid that. I've figured out what my future vision is. I can put that into play. I can work toward my vision by purposely finding different ways to demonstrate cooperativeness with other people, and even being cooperative with yourself. So for me, purpose can be more of how do I put my vision into practice every day.
Oh, got it. So, how, when you're thinking about that, Heather, just in your own work or your own work with clients, how do you define that? Like, what do you do to define that, or put a framework around purpose? Because that does seem like one of those things that can be kind of hard to nail down if you don't have a framework or a structure for it.
Right. Yes, it absolutely can be kind of elusive and hard to nail down. So perhaps I can tell you a brief story about a client that I had, and we went through a values exercise, and through that, very strongly, it came out that being in service to others is a really high, important value of hers. And that's great. So we landed on something very specific about her and something very, very important to her about being in service. At the same time, we were also doing work around her job, and she was not particularly fulfilled by her job. She wasn't particularly happy with the kind of work that she was doing. She felt that it was rather mundane and boring, and it also required her to use an analytical skill set, which wasn't really her forte. So we reframed her work by looking at her work as being in service to others. And when she was able to look at how in everyday work life she can take an approach, an attitude of serving others, that actually helped make her job a little bit better. Now, she still wasn't completely fulfilled by it, but it did create a shift in her work where she felt more purposeful and she felt she was being in service to others.
It's amazing how our own perspective on how we approach our daily work really does affect how we show up and and just our engagement level with what we do and why it's important to us.
Exactly. And it can change our frame of mind and our attitude, and it can affect our relationships with other people, our relationships with ourselves. It's very powerful.
Before we started recording, you had asked me something around the show, and I'm trying to remember the question, but it really got me thinking around just maybe it was on one of the later points here, Heather, but it got me thinking around just what my purpose is for this show and how this has tried to show up. Yeah, we were talking about that. And so, it's interesting because this has been really helpful for me just in looking at how I show up here each week for the Coaching for Leaders community and what I write and the people that I choose to have on the show. And, one of the things that's been really important, because there's so many, there's tons of great content out there on leadership, and, there's so much research. You and I could spend like a half a day just talking about the research on like values and all that stuff. But a lot of it is really like theoretical and academic. And when you talked to me about this earlier, one of the things I was saying is that, what I feel my purpose is to be a curator of wisdom about people, because I don't have.
Love that.
I'm glad. Thanks.
Yeah.
I don't certainly have all the answers about how to work with people. God knows. And yet I try to each week find things that will be of value to this community, and to then present them in such a way where we all can use them really practically. Because I think it's really easy to get caught up in like all the theoretical, these models, and there's really interesting stuff out there. I mean, for those who have gotten into it in our audience, I mean, there's lots of things you can look at, but I want people to walk away from listening to the show and they say, I can do one thing out of that. Like I can put that picture in my garage today.
Right.
Or I can do some thinking about where do I want to be a year from now? And if I wrote out what that looked like today, what's the action I can put around it? Like those are key things that people could do and take action on that'll make their lives better. And that really is a driver for me as far as my purpose.
Right. And you having identified your purpose about being a curator of wisdom about people, it really is the foundation, as you already pointed out, for everything you do in reference to your show. The topics, the interviewees you choose, the content you put out about your show, the website, et cetera. It all is the foundation for your purpose of being a curator of wisdom for people.
Yeah, and I think that's it's been helpful for me, Heather, because there are a lot of other podcasts out there. There's a lot of other people who talk about the topics I do, and that for me is always really helpful when I'm focused on my purpose and what I'm about. I don't get as distracted about what's going on in the rest of the world or feel like I need to compare myself to other people doing things. And I think that is something that I found also for my clients I've worked with over the years, that people who have a really clear sense of purpose are just busy doing stuff to make their lives better and make the world better. And people who don't get really caught up in the, who's doing something better than I am and how do I be in competition with others. So you've noticed this too.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's a real place of empowerment, of personal empowerment.
Cool. All right, let's go on to number 4 here, which is authenticity. This is one that we haven't talked about much on the show, and I'm curious. When you think of authenticity, Heather, how do you define that, and then why is that something that we should be thinking about from a standpoint of branding that is important?
So it's important from a point of personal branding, because personal brand, again, in my view, in my estimation, is about bringing out the best in you. It's not about trying to be someone you're not, or trying to copy the hottest, greatest, next best thing that's out there, or, practicing, to be, again, someone you're not. It's about being the best of who you are and bringing out the best in who you are. And when you're able to do that and be authentic, that's when you truly can make a difference in other people's lives. And authenticity is also where your values are truly being showcased. And when they're showcased and you use your values, then you feel happy and satisfied and fulfilled. And again, you feel like you're making a difference in the world from a place of purpose.
I like it. So how have you used that practically, or seen a client use that practically that's really helped them to align more with their purpose and what they're doing on a daily basis?
So one client I can think of is that there were times when she interacted with her supervisor where she felt very disempowered, and she felt like she couldn't respond back to her supervisor. So I worked with a client on this of helping her find that inner strength, so that she could kind of stand up for herself, if you will, when her supervisor, would be difficult and be critical of her. And we were bringing out the best inside of this client so that she could be empowered to speak up and to not feel so put down by her supervisor. But we did it in a way, and I worked with the client in a way to bring out her natural self, her authentic self, so that she wasn't responding from a place of, she was yelling and screaming back at the supervisor, or she was, being defensive and difficult, or, she was attacking and blaming the supervisor. She was able to speak up for herself in a way that was authentic to who she was. And she was able to speak up in a way where she was clear and yet was listening to her supervisor at the same time.
And what had to change in her thinking in order to get to that point?
Well, a lot of practice. The client and I worked quite a bit together. And some things that had to change for her is one, she had to work on the courage to empower herself to speak up in a way that allowed her to speak up and listen at the same time. And something else we worked on is it's actually the same client who had service as a high value for her. So we worked on that value. And is she being in service to her when she feels disempowered? Is she being in service to her supervisor when she shuts down and can't listen to what the supervisor has to say? So we also capitalized on her values, in other words, to help bring out her authenticity and to help her find that authentic place of where she could speak up and continue to listen and be engaged in the conversation at the same time.
I love that, being true to yourself and figuring out the way that's going to work for you, because I think that it is certainly the case. A lot of times a lot of us try to copy what other people have done and the ways that different people approach things. And it's great to kind of be able to borrow different wisdom from different people, but then to kind of make it truly your own in such a way that you can communicate and interact with the world in a really authentic way. Right.
Because that's the real you. That's the real natural you.
Speaking of the natural real you, the fifth piece is perceptions, the fifth piece of this element, which is so critical of how people perceive you. And so so I'm curious, Heather, because there's it's reality doesn't matter as much if people don't perceive that reality. So so we may be someone who's very caring, strategic, structured, whatever, but if people don't perceive that, it doesn't really matter. So I'm curious, why is perceptions and how people perceive you important? That may even be an obvious answer, but I'm curious for you, maybe specifically, what's a time you've run into this in your work where you had to change a perception of people around you about how you showed up and how you worked, and just so we could get an idea of how we might utilize that too.
Yeah, perceptions are powerful. And we define our world and we define other people based upon our perceptions. So for me, let's see, an experience that I had going back a handful of years ago, I participated in a program where I received some anonymous feedback about myself and how I was perceived. And in some ways, the feedback surprised me, and in other ways, the feedback didn't surprise me. So the feedback was all centered around things like being very organized and being very logical and dependable and responsible and things like that, which are all great qualities, not putting down those qualities at all. It's just that the feedback all centered around themes like that. And none of the feedback was anything close to words like being creative or being innovative. And that's really how I saw myself. I saw myself as being kind of a creative thinker and, creative when I would come up with workshop designs or when I would work with clients or I would plan meetings. I always thought I was putting a creative spin on things. And yet the feedback all showed the opposite of that. Oh, interesting. And yeah, it was very, very, very revealing. And looking back at that time in my life, I can understand why it came back that way. Because I was in graduate school at the time, I was working full time, so my life was very, very structured. So I can see why other people perceive me that way. Well, to shift that perception and to start people and to help shift that perception so that I was viewed as creative and innovative, I did the simplest thing. I just started using the word creative in my language. So if I was in a meeting with my boss or what have you, I would just infuse the word creative here and there, just kind of sprinkle it in, here and there as appropriate. And Dave, I'm telling you, like within 2 weeks, I was talking with my boss at that time, and we were talking about whatever the topic was, and he said, Heather, you're a very creative person, blah, 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 blah.
That's
I
awesome.
about fell off my chair that I was described that way. So that's a very simple thing that any of your listeners can do, is just start to use the words by which they want to be perceived.
I resonate with that so much because when I think about perception, I think about, Heather, just the ways I show up in the world. I'm a quieter person, and I don't tend to say a lot in meetings and interactions unless I need to. And so when I was thinking about this topic today, I was thinking almost that same thing, is that I have that real tendency to under-communicate, and sometimes people don't feel like they get the information from me that they need, or they don't necessarily know what's going on. And I found that same thing, like just being intentional about letting people know about something, or using the right language that aligns with the message I want to communicate. It can make a big difference in how people perceive us and align more with how we really are and the things we're thinking about and want to show up as anyway.
Right, exactly. And the difficulty in that lies in, if we see ourselves, for instance, quiet, I see myself as quiet, but other people perceive me as withdrawn or controlled or difficult to read. So when we perceive ourselves one way and other people perceive ourselves differently, then that's when conflict can arise and miscommunication and obviously misperceptions. So that's why perceptions is so powerful for us to understand them, so that we can mitigate, difficulties in relationships.
I love the ability to change how we show up, and I think that's such power of knowing how you're perceived and being able to get some feedback. And there's so many wonderful assessments out there, Heather, and so many wonderful things you can, exercises and resources you can go through to get perceptions of what people think around you. But then the key is, of course, changing those perceptions so they align with the way that you want to align. And I love the example of using vocabulary. And you've mentioned a whole bunch of things that I think that would be of real value for our audience to do, to take some immediate action on today. I love the example of just changing your vocabulary and what you're saying and why you're saying it on a regular basis to align with how you want to be perceived. I love the picture example in the garage. I mean, I think that is, as far as creating a vision, I think a mantra for all of us is to have something, whether it's a picture, whether it's in writing, whether it's, a blog post, whatever it is, that is really clear on where we're going.
Right, exactly. Whatever fits for you.
Yeah, and I also love the just going through the values exercise, and I'll put a link to in the show notes to all of the things we've mentioned here and all the links, and also a link to Heather's website as well, because I know you have a lot of resources there too, and folks can definitely check that out if that's something that would be helpful to them. Hey, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and before I let you go, of these 5 things, what would you say is the one you most still struggle with?
Oh, wow. Let's see. That's a great question. So we have values, vision, purpose, authenticity, and perceptions. I would say, gosh, that's a tough question, Dave. Perhaps perceptions. I think that's still one that I still work on and continue to try to make progress on. So I would say perception. And perceptions is as I think we said earlier, it's a person's reality. So shifting perceptions. Well, I gave a pretty simple way of affecting perceptions by changing your language. At the same time, perceptions can be difficult to or take more attention and effort to shift as well. So.
Yeah, I actually the same one for me, perceptions. I think it's the others are ones that I have a little more direct control over. At least that's how I perceive it. And perception for me requires me to really take actions that are going to change how other people perceive what I'm doing and what I'm thinking. And for me, being a quieter person, that's something that I find that's a continual struggle. So you and I are in the same boat.
Okay. Yeah. Well, great.
Heather Backstrom is an executive coach, and she is done a lot of work on personal branding. And Heather, I'm so glad that you've joined us, and I hope folks check you out online as well.
I look forward to it, and thank you again, Dave. This has been a tremendous experience. Really appreciate your generosity of inviting me.
Always a pleasure to talk with you, Heather. Take care. My question for you this week is, what action will you take to enhance one of these 5 elements of your personal brand? You heard Heather and I talk about which ones we struggled with more. My goal this week, and I've already started working on this, is to be much more intentional about letting other people know about what's going on in my mind and decisions I've made and projects and thoughts and directions forward on things I'm working on. That is something I fall flat on more often than I'd like to. And so I've already taken a few actions to do that better this week. And I'd encourage you to take action as well. And I'd love to hear your answer to that question. And so if you have something that's come to mind already, go on over to the show notes at coachingforleaders.com/133. That'll take you right to the notes for this episode and all the things we mentioned. Of course, if you get the weekly update, you'll get that in your inbox on Wednesday. And as always, if you have comments, questions, or feedback for the show in general, either on today's topic or for a future topic, you can always reach out to me at coachingforleaders.com/feedback. And one reason you'd want to do that in the very near future is the next question and answer show is coming up in 2 weeks. Episode 135, as I've mentioned, is going to be a Q&A show, all Q&A on the topic of training. So what training options and questions do you have for yourself as far as how you may want to invest your time or resources into training to become a more effective leader? How you would train members of your team, what kind of training resources to look at, training theory, technology, whatever is on your mind around training and how to develop the skills and competencies of others. Fair game for that episode. So again, coachingforleaders.com/feedback. If that is of interest to you, send me a message. I've got several questions already, but I still have room for a couple of more. So, and I always love getting the questions by audio if possible. So do send those along. And a huge thank you this week for a whole bunch of folks who have subscribed to the weekly update. I'm so grateful for so many of you reaching out every week and welcoming new folks to the Coaching for Leaders community. Thank you for doing that. And do make contact with me and let me know anytime I can be helpful to you. And these folks this week are Maria White, Gail Williams, Linda Eller, Valerie Hogan, Kathleen Wheeler, Sarah Blaze, Coop Cooper, Lisa Stockwell, Renee Hernandez, Lena Staffgard, Brenda Mundy, Jesse Chen, Dee Maher, Philippe Souza, Vicky Nicholas, Luke Robinson, Cindy Paris. Hi, Cindy. Good to hear from you. David Riviera, Heath Mullican, Zoma Monslave, and Dan Cook this week. Subscribe to the weekly update. Hey, for those of you who have been getting the weekly updates, and also those of you who are just now subscribed, I do publish this update every Wednesday, and the last few weeks, the graphics aren't working right. I am actively troubleshooting what's going on with that, and with a lot of other things going on at the moment, I haven't put as much priority into that as I probably should have. But I wanted everyone to know if you're getting the weekly updates. I know some of you are not seeing the graphics. It looks fine on the previews when the system's sending it out, but for whatever reason, they're not showing up. Just know that I'm working on that, and thank you in advance if you're able to be patient with that. The content's always going to be there, and the graphics will be back shortly, one way or the other. So anyway, if you'd like to get that, thank you for those of you subscribed this week. If you'd like to get the weekly update as well, it is a booster shot between shows on how to lead better by giving you some actionable advice on how to improve your communication, human relations, or personal productivity. And plus, I mentioned you'll get the notes from every show, including this one. So if you'd like to get that in your inbox, just go to coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. Plus, as you know, you'll get access to my video overview and a downloadable guide on the 10 leadership books that will help you to get better results from others. So definitely check that out. Hey, a huge thank you this week from the person named L on iTunes, or it might even be Linda from the weekly update. Linda, if it's you, thank you for taking a moment to write a written review of the show on iTunes. I so appreciate it. Hey, if this show's been valuable to you and if you've been listening for a bit, I would love to get an honest review from you on iTunes, and that always helps me to continue to learn how to make this show better, and also for more people to find this as a resource. So if you'd like to do that, you can go to iTunes or Stitcher, coachingforleaders.com/iTunes or coachingforleaders.com/Stitcher, whichever directory you like. Hey, have a great week, everyone, and I'm looking forward to talking with you again next week, and in 2 weeks, the Q&A show on training. Have a great week.